Do you think that we're not being honest as Americans in terms of looking at our history, looking at the way we deal with people that don't necessarily agree with our point of view? I mean, we look at Bobby and we look at Martin and we look at Malcolm and we look at John, and they got rid of every one of them. So why should we be surprised when someone else strikes out with violence in this country?
Well, yes, and it's true, and you have to consider as well that as a people, we were conditioned with the ideal of love enemies and turn the other cheek, when in fact this is a nation that doesn't love its enemy and it never turns its cheek, and it has the military arsenal to prove it, which is why the defense budget of this country consumes so much of the national budget.
Right.
And this is a country, as Charles mentioned earlier, that was founded with war and blood and violence. Even the national anthem itself, it glorifies violence. Ramparts screaming, rockets, red glare, bombs bursting in air. And that is not looked at as though it's glorifying violence, but that is, in fact, what it is. It was inspired by the War of 1812.
Right.
And so violence is part of the political bloodstream of this nation. And there was one author, I believe his name is Hubbard. He made the remark that as long as governments make examples by killing their enemies, then citizens are going to eventually begin to do the same thing. And so, you know, there's a gun culture in this country, in this society, that trickles down from this whole notion of freedom to bear arms, which is something that's supposed to be so glorified and noble. But that is one of the ideals of this country that is coming to haunt it and stalk its citizens, and we've seen that recently with the shooting in Arizona.
Well, one of the things that they were talking about, it was they said Arizona has one of the most liberal gun laws. And then someone said, well, do you think now that this has happened that they'll do something about it? I said, as long as the NRA is out there, which is strong in Arizona, and the two senators that are sitting out there with Kyle and what's his name, McCain, I don't think anything is going to happen.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to change much of anything at all. But, you know, again, I really think we need to start looking at coping techniques, because whatever is spurring people to this violence, whether it's a history of violence that you know, the country's built on, or whether it's people not realizing that there's alternatives to violence, whatever the case is, I think we really need to look at that closely. Because I remember about a year ago, I was watching a program where they had a woman who was teaching young children, I mean grade school, about coping techniques. And they interviewed some of the kids afterwards, and there were some kids saying, oh, well, normally when I got angry, I just wanted to hit someone, but now I realize that I need to do so and so and so and so, you know, talk it out or whatever, you know, the coping technique. But if we look at the fact that young children that age are going to grow into older people, and then if they don't have the proper coping techniques, they are going to turn to either physical violence or, you know, criminal, you know, violence, or, you know, this type of a situation where it just turns into a mass tragedy, then we're not going to, you know, have any idea of how to handle this when it happens the next time.
But looking on the national stage, though, I mean, we have Congress, for example. You lie, you know.
And empirically, you know, like piggybacking on your whole idea of gun sales, that there were two seminal events that sparked gun sales, especially like in Arizona. One was the election and the inauguration of Obama. And my understanding is that since this event, the gun sales went up 66%. Since this event. And remember now, one reason that they speak that people should have guns is to protect themselves. So it didn't protect, because the Congresswoman, she's an advocate for the NRA or the gun, and it didn't save her. And the whole idea, they say, well, if somebody has a gun, then I can protect myself because I have a gun. But nobody shot this young man.
No, he didn't.
So it didn't save anybody. Only thing it did was it was an agent of murder for 3 people or 6 people, and putting other people in the hospital. But
I want to kind of look at Congress and talk about the political discourse that we see there with the name calling. and the negativity in terms of the ads. We know we just came through a political process of the elections and stuff. There was a lot of bloodletting, a lot of anger, a lot of hate, you know, very nasty. I mean, we saw ads where they portrayed President Obama everything except for who he was. So, I mean, when you look at that, you look at the discourse of these people that are supposed to be leaders of this country, what does that say to other people? I mean, what did you think about that, Ezra?
Well, the Obama thing, in terms of the signs and the depictions of him as the Joker, the Riddler, as Hitler, a lot of what we see there is clearly racist, and a lot of times it's disguised as politics. We saw Dick Cheney, he cussed out a guy on the chamber floor, told him to go F himself or something like that. And so certainly the discourse has gotten out of hand, but I think as well it has to do with media coverage, you know.
But we
you have
glorify.
more media, you have more media embedded everywhere, and so more stories get covered and you get more news, but it's really more of the same news. I mean, you could, when the nightly news come on at 6:30, you could turn from ABC to NBC to ABC, and you'll find that they're covering the exact same stories, the exact same way, using the exact same language and using the exact same footage. So it's like the news is being coordinated by some type of central source. Otherwise, it'd be impossible for all three networks to have simultaneously have the same kinds of stories. And
Right.
so they hype the discourse and they hype the differences between the parties. But in a greater sense, I think that there's a target for us as a black audience to keep the socio-political, ideological framework of thinking focused within the democratic realm of party politics. And so that when we hear things, we see things, we automatically identify ourselves as being a Democrat. The Republicans and the Tea Parties, they're the enemies, when in fact, at the end of the day, it's all Americanization.
Yeah.
And just in terms of trying to get to the source of hate, James Baldwin had a cliche, I know I'm paraphrasing, I hope I'm correct, that he said that the reason why people focus on their hate is because they don't want to confront their fears. So when we get to the whole, in terms of what this whole atmosphere of hate is all about, is really about fear. You know, and like, if we look at the story of America, that's what it's all about. Even when we look at these 24-hour news cycles, it's always about making people afraid.